So the next thing that we want to do here is fix the white balance. That is a core component of dealing with S-Log3 as a whole and getting the best results out of these cameras. It's really all about getting the right white balance dialed in. And we talked a little bit in the previous lesson about how it's really important to do this on set and to make sure your settings are correct. In fact, when we shot this, I knew I was going to use this footage to demo in this course. And so I actually did not even use an ND filter because I wanted to make sure the white balance was as precise as possible so that when I was demoing this for you, everything would not have a slight green cast or magenta cast or anything like that. However, with all that said, when you look at S-Log3 footage, it does tend to have a little bit of a skewed tint on the magenta green axis, and it's typically easier to start your white balance correction by fixing the tint issue before you fix warm to cool or blue to orange, let's say. The tint axis is on the green and magenta spectrum. So let's start by doing that. I'm going to go down here just to the tint setting, and I'm just going to pull this a little bit to the right here just to kind of neutralize some of the green. And I'm going to take it a little bit too far just so we can kind of see what the limit is. This is obviously looking really purple now, and that's not ideal. So that's at 40. If we go to 0, that looks kind of green now in comparison. So if we go to roughly a halfway point, I'm going to go to 20. I think that looks pretty good. That's maybe just a touch magenta to my eye, so I'll pull that back to 10 or maybe 15 here. And I think that's looking pretty good. Again, I know what I'm looking for here. This is not a final look. Of course, if you're just building a base grade, you're looking for these very technical corrections and adjustments. But let's quickly turn that off actually. And I should make this on a separate node. So I'm just, for the purpose of demonstrating, I'm adding a third node here, and I'm gonna set our tint to 15, which is where we had it. And even that to my eye is a little strong, so I'll take it back down to 12. And you may find a lot of these settings are going to work across the board when you are working on shots like this in the same environment under the same lighting conditions. Generally speaking, you're going to be able to use very similar tint and temperature settings, except of course if all of a sudden you get cloud coverage or the lighting changes, different time of day, all of those things are going to affect you. But if you're shooting pretty quickly in the same environment, these settings are certainly ones you can remember, save, and then just sort of copy and paste as you go. So for now, we have the tint at 12. And I'm going to toggle that on and off again so we can see what that's doing. And that's kind of just cleaning up the image. And if you notice, there's more color separation as well. So when I turn this off, if you look at just sort of over here, this area of the frame, the brown from the cliffside and sort of the green and how it blends into her hair, and all this kind of feels like it's a little bit of a color wash almost. And I'll go full screen just to show you here. But then if I turn on the other node, and this is subtle, so that's off and then on, there's just a little bit more color separation. You can start to feel the hair popping out a little bit from the green shrub behind it. So just a quick kind of look at that. I'll resize this here to the window. And the next thing we're going to do now that we've adjusted the tint and sort of neutralized that part of the color palette is we're going to dial up the white balance a little bit, the temperature setting. So I'll add another node for this. And I want to reiterate, you do not have to use multiple nodes to do each of these steps. It really is just up to you if you like to work that way, if you want to be able to turn things on and off, especially as you're first learning, you're first working, it's probably helpful to break it down that way. But once you know exactly what you're doing and you've kind of done it a million times, you may just want to contain things on one or two nodes just to speed your own process up and not let things get too out of hand in terms of your node tree or your effect stack and your NLE. So let's go back here and let's take a look at the temperature setting and let's see what happens if we dial it up and make it a little bit too warm. And then if we dial it down, make it a little bit too cool. So in both scenarios, I'm pushing this to an extreme, either too cool or too warm for what we would actually like. But one of the things you can sort of notice if we go, let's go to plus 600 versus minus 600 and just kind of take a look. So this feels very, very warm, very kind of color wash, sepia almost looking. And then if we go to negative 600, that looks very cool, but that looks better than if we push it warmer in the sense that there's more color separation, which is what I'm always looking for. And one of the key components of this color pipeline is we need to get rid of some of the color pollution that is blending between different colors that really should feel like they're a little bit more distinct from each other. And so although -600 is certainly too cold for a neutral look, it looks more neutral than +600. And this is just a very quick, kind of easy little tip that you can use when you're working with Sony or any other footage for that matter. If you don't quite have the trained eye yet to know when you look at a shot like this that's relatively neutral, if it's a little bit too warm or a little bit too cool, sometimes it's hard, especially in a shot like this, because the ocean in the background, of course, is blue. It's actually skewing a little bit warm on the blue side, but your brain may not register it as that. So if you're just looking at a shot like this, you may sort of initially feel that it's very neutral, or maybe it's even a little cool. But in fact, this shot has room to cool down. So let's just take the temperature setting. Let's bring it down just a little bit, but we'll stop before these highlights here. If we look at these very bright highlights down here in the area up here, we don't want these to feel like they're tinting blue. So even at 300, or sorry, -300 here, it's a little much. So we'll take it to, let's say, -200. And now let's just toggle that on and off. So that's before and after. And as you can see, there is a lot more color separation again happening here. And if we turn everything off, let's just kind of see where we're at so far. So that's our initial S-Log look, flat. Here's our correction, our base correction with the S-Log3 LUT. Here's some contrast being added. Here's our tint adjustment. And here is our white balance adjustment with a temperature at -200. So at this point, again, this would not be our final base grade, but it does get us at least to a more neutral starting point using the fewest amount of keystrokes or brush strokes or whatever analogy you want to use. We've really just done a couple of very quick, simple steps to add the LUT, adjust our exposure, increase the contrast, and then neutralize the color and create more natural color separation through a tint and temperature adjustment. So at this point in the color pipeline, some people might just kind of call it a day and move on to stylizing their shots. But I like to take things just one step further to correct for some of the other issues that you can't really fix unless you're using the color wheels themselves and really dialing things in a little bit more manually and specifically.